Hey guys, tonight we drift back in time, slipping quietly into a damp, narrow alley where the scent of wood smoke mingles with the faint tang of stale beer and something not quite identifiable simmering in a dented pot. The year could be 1300 and something, the season, perhaps autumn, but you're not here to enjoy a feast, oh no. You're here to learn what filled the bellies of the poor in the long, slow centuries of the Middle Ages. And truthfully, you probably won't survive this. Not just because of the questionable hygiene, but because the average medieval diet for the lower classes was less about variety and more about enduring hunger. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and your local time in the comments. I always love seeing where my sleepy travelers are joining from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward, your boots crunching on a layer of dry straw scattered across the packed earth floor of the cottage. The interior is dim, the air smoky from the small hearth, where a pot swings lazily over the embers. This is not a kitchen in the modern sense, it's simply a fire in the middle of a living space, sometimes venting through a crude hole in the roof, sometimes not. Everything smells faintly of soot, damp cloth, and boiled grain. You are in the home of a poor peasant family, and what they eat is the story of their survival. For the majority of the Middle Ages, the diet of the poor revolved around one word: bread. Bread was not just food, it was the foundation of life, the bulk of daily calories. But don't imagine soft, fluffy loaves. The bread here is coarse, heavy, and speckled with bits of bran, and sometimes even grit from the millstones that ground the grain. It's made mostly from rye barley, or oats. Wheat bread is a luxury for the wealthy. On good days, the bread is just stale enough to sop up something wet without crumbling. On bad days, it's so hard you could hammer in a nail with it. Grain, in one form or another, is the backbone. When the harvest is decent, there's enough to bake bread, make porridge, or boil into pottage, a kind of endlessly adaptable stew thickened with whatever is available. On the hearth now, the pot contains such a pottage, a murky mixture of barley, a few shriveled carrots from the garden onion tops, and a handful of greens that might be nettles or maybe cabbage leaves. There's no meat in sight. Meat for the poor is a rare guest, maybe during a festival, maybe if an animal dies unexpectedly. Otherwise, animal protein comes from eggs, milk, more often made into cheese, and the occasional bit of salted herring bought from the market. You crouch down near the fire and peer into the pot. It smells humble. The vegetables have been simmering so long, they're more suggestion than substance. The pottage is what the family eats day after day, endlessly adjusted, based on the season: peas and beans, when it's warmer root vegetables, when the ground is frozen. In summer, a splash of fresh milk might enrich it. In winter, maybe a pinch of salt or a scrap of lard for flavor, if they're lucky. The rhythm of eating is as predictable as the tolling of the church bell. Breakfast is rare, maybe a hunk of bread dipped in ale or water before heading to the fields. The main meal, dinner, happens late morning or midday. Supper is lighter, a smaller echo of dinner. There's no snacking, not because it's frowned upon, but because there's simply nothing extra. Every crumb is accounted for. Water is not the primary drink. Instead, everyone, including children, drinks small ale, a weak beer brewed from barley or oats. It's low in alcohol, just enough to kill off harmful bacteria, and provides a few extra calories. It's cloudy, tangy, and not especially pleasant unless you're used to it. On rare occasions, there might be cider in apple-growing regions or thin wine in warmer climates. But ale is the constant companion to every meal. And here's the reality check. The diet is monotonous. It's not eat the rainbow, it's eat the beige. Bread, pottage, ale, day after day. In good harvest years, you might add peas, onions, or even a sliver of bacon. In bad years, well, hunger tightens its grip. People stretch what they have with fillers, ground acorns, chestnuts, or bean flour mixed into bread. Sometimes the bread becomes so dense and bitter that eating it feels like chewing through damp bark. Your host, a weathered woman with calloused hands, offers you a wooden bowl. Inside is pottage thickened until it's almost paste. She tears a piece of bread from a larger loaf and hands it to you. The bread serves as both utensil and food. You dip it into the stew, feeling the heat warm your fingers. This is not a meal to linger over. It's fuel meant to keep you on your feet through long hours of labor. Still, there's a kind of quiet dignity to it. This food, humble as it is, has kept families alive for generations. It's tied to the land, to the seasons, to the grinding cycle of planting and harvest. The barley in your bread grew just beyond the hedgerow. The onions were pulled from the garden behind the cottage. The nettles, prickly now, but tender in the pot, were gathered along the stream where you draw water. And when the seasons turn, the menu shifts. In spring, wild greens like sorrel and young nettles are abundant. In summer, there are beans and peas. In autumn, apples and turnips. In winter, stored onions, cabbages, and whatever root vegetables survived in the pit. Preservation is key. Cabbages are buried in straw beans. Are dried apples stored in cool lofts, fish salted, and sometimes thin strips of meat are smoked over the hearth for leaner days. But even with these methods, the threat of scarcity looms. The poor live in the shadow of the hungry gap, that treacherous window in late winter and early spring, when the old stores are nearly gone and the new crops have yet to grow. It's during this time that bread might be stretched with chaff soups, thinned to near nothingness, and families forced to rely on whatever they can, forage nettles, dandelion leaves, even the inner bark of certain trees in desperate times. You glance at the children huddled near the fire. Their cheeks are rosy from the heat, their clothes patched many times over. They chew their bread solemnly, accustomed to its coarseness. No one complains. Complaining won't fill the pot any faster. Outside the village smells of wood smoke and damp earth. Somewhere a rooster crows. You can picture the other cottages, each with its own smoky hearth, each with its own pot of pottage bubbling away. Meals are not occasions here. They're simply the punctuation marks in the long sentence of daily work. As you finish your bowl, you realize that the food of the poor in medieval times is not about culinary artistry, it's about survival. And in that survival, there's a story worth telling of endurance, of adaptation, of finding enough to get through one more day. The bread may be coarse, the ale weak, the stew plain, but in the end, it has carried countless generations through centuries of toil, season after season, year after year. You step back out into the narrow lane, the cold air settling around you like a damp shawl. Somewhere the faint clang of a blacksmith's hammer rings through the village, but mostly it's quiet, save for the shuffling of feet on frozen ground and the creak of wooden carts as they trundle past. Here the food story continues beyond the hearth. It's told in gardens, in market stalls, in fields, and in the hands of the women who work tirelessly to coax sustenance from whatever the land grudgingly offers. Behind almost every peasant's home lies a croft, a modest patch of cultivated ground. It's not ornamental. Every inch serves a purpose. Rows of hardy vegetables grow here: cabbages, leeks, onions, parsnips. These are the workhorses of the poor man's diet. They don't need pampering, they withstand frost, and they keep well through winter. In a good season, you'll see the leaves standing tall green against the brown earth. In a lean one, the rows look pitiful, the soil bare where seeds failed to sprout. Women and older children tend these gardens, their backs bent for hours under cloudy skies. They know the timing of each plant, when to sow, when to weed, when to harvest. A kitchen garden is a constant, slow-burning insurance policy against hunger. It's also a source of flavor, or what passes for it here, since herbs like parsley, sage, and dill might be grown along the edges, their leaves snipped, to enliven a pot of otherwise bland pottage. Beyond the croft lies common land, where villagers can graze a few animals if they're lucky enough to own them. Chickens are the most common. They scratch around freely, providing eggs that, though small, are a valuable supplement. A hen that lays reliably is treasured. One that doesn't may find itself in the pot, though the meat will be stringy and tough unless boiled for hours. A goat, if a family can afford it, is another prize. Goats are hardy feed on rough forage and provide milk thinner than cow's milk, but useful for drinking or cheese making. Soft cheeses are common, often eaten fresh. Hard cheeses are rarer and more valuable, able to last for weeks or months. Cheese offers precious protein and fat in a diet that otherwise leans heavily toward carbohydrates. But even these small luxuries depend on fortune. Illness can kill an animal, suddenly leaving a gap that can't be filled easily. And while the right to graze animals on common land is a lifeline, it's also a point of tension. Too many animals overgraze the pasture. Disputes arise. Rules are set by the manor court, enforced unevenly. Food for the poor is never just about what the land produces. It's about what you're allowed to take from it. Markets are another vital source of food, though. For peasants, they're as much about looking as buying. A trip to the market means seeing produce from other villages, dried fish from coastal towns, small sacks of salt, bundles of onions braided together for storage. Spices are here too, pepper, cinnamon, saffron, but priced beyond the dreams of most. These luxuries belong to the merchants, the gentry, the monastery kitchens. For you, the market is where you might sell a few eggs, a surplus cabbage, or a skein of homespun yarn to earn the pennies needed for salt, or a slab of salted herring. Fish is an interesting case. The medieval church requires fasting on many days, no meat from warm-blooded animals, but fish is allowed. For the wealthy, that might mean fresh salmon or lamprey. For the poor, it's dried cod, salted herring, or small freshwater fish caught in local streams. Herring is the most common, cheap, plentiful, heavily salted, so it keeps for months. It's soaked before cooking, but even then, its briny tang lingers, a reminder that this is preserved food, not fresh. On the edge of the village, you spot a group of children digging near the hedgerow. They're foraging, a constant background activity in poor communities. In summer and autumn, wild berries are gathered, blackberries, elderberries, sloes. In spring, wild garlic and nettles. In autumn, hazelnuts and acorns. Some finds are eaten fresh, others are dried or stored. Even mushrooms appear on the table, though always cautiously, the knowledge of which are safe is passed down through generations. Sometimes the forest provides game rabbits, hares, perhaps a pigeon or two. Technically, hunting is the preserve of the Lord, but small game caught with snares or by hand often goes unnoticed. A rabbit in the pot is a feast, the meat boiled with root vegetables, the broth sopped up with bread until not a drop remains. But these moments are rare, the exception that proves the rule. When harvest time comes, the rhythm of eating changes. Bread is fresher, the ale stronger, the pottage richer, with new vegetables. Work is harder too, dawn to dusk in the fields, cutting, binding, hauling. Food at harvest is eaten quickly with gratitude, but also with the awareness that the bounty must be managed carefully to last through the year. Grain is stored in communal barns or in lofts above the living space, the smell of it mingling with the smoke from the hearth. Vermin are a constant threat. Cats earn their keep here, and damp can ruin a season's worth of work in days. This is why bread is baked regularly in small enough batches to keep from spoiling, but large enough to justify the work. Ovens are sometimes communal, too, shared by several families who take turns baking. Through all this, you begin to see the medieval poor's diet as a delicate balancing act. It's about making the most of every scrap, preserving whatever can be preserved, finding flavor where flavor is scarce, and always thinking weeks or months ahead. There's little space for indulgence. Even the sweetest moments, an apple in autumn, a mug of slightly stronger ale, are tinged with the awareness that they're temporary. And yet food is not just sustenance. It's part of the social fabric. The sharing of bread with a neighbor in need, the communal brewing of ale, the bringing together of villagers for a feast on a holy day. These moments affirm connections even in the face of scarcity. When a pig is slaughtered, the event is shared blood, pudding, fresh meat, offal dishes prepared immediately before they spoil. Nothing is wasted, and nothing is eaten entirely alone. Back in the lane, the air carries the mingled scents of wood smoke, damp earth, and the faint tang of cooking cabbage. You hear a woman calling children to supper, not a lavish spread, but a pot of pottage and perhaps a slice of cheese. The food of the poor in medieval times is not a catalogue of exotic dishes. It's a study in resourcefulness, in the constant interplay between hunger and plenty, between the harsh dictates of the land and the stubborn determination of those who live from it. And as you move toward the dimming edge of the village, you realize that every meal here, every hunk of bread, every ladle of stew is a small act of defiance against the ever-present possibility of going without. Each bite says we are still here. The light is fading now, slipping away behind the crooked thatch roofs and bare branches. You make your way along the muddy track that leads toward the manor, not because you're headed inside, but because this is where you see the lines that divide what you can eat from what you can't. The great open fields stretch ahead, divided into long, narrow strips. Each family tills a few of these strips scattered across the open fields so that no one is left with only good land or only poor soil. This patchwork is the heartbeat of your diet. Wheat grows in some strips, rye or barley in others, oats in another. For the poor, barley and rye are far more common than wheat. Wheat demands better soil and more careful tending, and so most of it ends up in the bread of the Lord's household or in the abbey's kitchens. Your own bread, dark and coarse, comes from these other grains often mixed together. Barley has a nutty bitterness. Rye brings a dense chew. Oats soften things slightly, but can make the loaf crumbly. The texture is nothing like the airy loaves of modern times. It is compact, filling a meal in itself. As you walk past the fields, you notice the stubbled remains of the last harvest. The stalks are short, now cut close to the ground months ago, but they still whisper in the wind. Somewhere a scarecrow leans drunkenly, its straw body sagging after the long winter. These fields will soon green again, but for now they rest part of the careful cycle of medieval farming. Land is left fallow every few years to recover, and the success of next year's harvest depends on how well that rhythm is kept. The manor's granary looms nearby, a long timber building raised off the ground to deter vermin. Inside, the air smells of dust and dry husks. This is where the tithe is stored, a portion of each villager's harvest, owed to the Lord, collected before you can take home your share. What's left for you depends on the yield, the weather, and the mood of those who measure it. A lean harvest means lean rations, and there's no appealing the measure. You glance toward the dovecote, a tall, round structure where pigeons nest. The birds flutter in and out of the small square holes near the top. Pigeons are a delicacy and the Lord's property. Killing one without permission is poaching punishable by fines or worse. You might never taste pigeon meat in your life unless it's part of a communal feast after some special occasion. The same is true of deer boar or larger game strictly reserved for the nobility. Still, the land offers its quiet generosity to those who know where to look. The meadows and hedgerows hum with possibility. In summer, you might gather wild strawberries so small they seem like jewels scattered in the grass. In winter, the bounty is less sweet, but no less important rose hips for a sharp-tasting tea, high in the vitamin, that keeps you from illness when greens are scarce. You learn to respect these small gifts because they fill the spaces between one harvest and the next. Not far from the manor, the parish church stands with its square stone tower. Inside, on certain feast days, the poor might receive alms bread baked from wheat flour, small coins, or bowls of hot broth. This is a reminder that charity is as much a part of the medieval food system as farming. The wealthy give, the poor receive, though. In truth, the giving is often modest compared to the need. Still, a loaf of white bread in your hands is a rare moment of pleasure. The crumb is softer, the flavor sweeter, the crust lighter. You savor it, knowing you won't taste it again for months. On your way back toward the village, you pass a small mill by the stream. The wheel turns, slowly creaking with each push of the water. Here, grain is ground into flour, the coarse meal that forms the basis of everything you eat. Milling isn't free. A portion of your grain goes to the miller as payment. There's no choice but to pay. Without milling, you cannot make bread, and without bread, you cannot survive. Some whisper that the miller takes more than his due, but these are just whispers. You step inside the mill for a moment, feeling the cool dust of ground grain settle on your sleeves. The grindstones turn steadily, their surfaces grooved to bite into the kernels. The flour that pours out is not the fine powder of modern baking. It's flecked with bran, and sometimes grit from the stones themselves. This grit ends up in your bread, wearing down your teeth over the years. Dental pain is as much a part of the medieval diet as bread and ale. Outside again, you pause to watch a woman drawing water from the stream. This water will be boiled for cooking or brewed into ale. Drinking it raw is risky, though. In truth, people still do. The ale brewed in the village is a constant companion to meals, its weak alcohol content safer than water alone. Brewing is mostly women's work here, done in small batches, the yeast kept alive from one brewing to the next like a living household member. Back in the cottage, the evening meal begins. It is much like the midday one, a bowl of pottage, a hunk of bread, perhaps a slice of cheese, or an egg if fortune smiles. The pottage has simmered all day, the flavors of onion and barley melding into something thicker, heartier than the watery soup of leaner times. You dip your bread chew slowly and let the warmth spread through you. As you eat, the conversation drifts to the weather, the condition of the fields, the rumors from the manor court. Everyone listens closely when someone speaks of a good harvest in a neighboring village. It means there might be grain to trade if your own fields fail. The rhythm of food here is tied to the rhythm of news, of gossip, of whispered hope. When the bowls are scraped clean, the family prepares for bed. There is no dessert, no sweet to finish the meal. Instead, you go to sleep with the taste of barley and onion still in your mouth, your stomach warm, but never entirely full. This is the reality of eating for the poor in medieval times. Enough to keep you working, rarely enough to make you forget your hunger altogether. Outside, the night deepens. The smell of smoke lingers in the air, mingled now with the faint scent of damp earth. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks. The fields lie silent under the stars, waiting for the slow return of spring. And you, belly modestly filled, know that tomorrow's food will be much the same as today's, and that sameness is both a comfort and a quiet, constant worry. Morning comes quietly slipping into the village on a veil of mist. You wake to the sound of a cockerel's crow and the faint rustle of someone tending the fire. The air is cold. Your breath drifts in pale clouds before you. The day's first meal, if it can be called that, is simple, a piece of bread left from yesterday's baking, perhaps softened in a bowl of small ale or dipped in warm milk if there is any to spare. This is not a leisurely breakfast. It is fuel before the long hours of work ahead. You step outside, the frost crunching underfoot. Across the lane, a woman scatters handfuls of grain for her hens. Their clucks and flapping wings break the morning stillness. She guards the grain carefully. It is precious, and nothing can be wasted. The hens peck eagerly, their red combs bright against the pale winter light. In a few hours, she might gather 1 or 2 eggs still warm from the nest. Those eggs might be boiled for supper, or beaten into a thicker pottage on a feast day. The village stirs slowly. Men shoulder tools and head toward the fields. Women tend to children, fetch water, and see to the animals. Food preparation begins early and lasts most of the day, though it rarely involves the kind of cooking you might imagine. There are no elaborate recipes, no written instructions. Knowledge is passed by doing how long to soak dried beans so they soften properly. How to judge whether a cabbage will keep in the cool loft or must be eaten now. How to stretch a handful of peas into a meal for 6. Mid-morning brings the main meal of the day, dinner. This is when the largest portion of food is eaten, providing energy for the hardest labor hours. Bread, of course, forms the backbone, thick slices cut from a round loaf, sometimes spread with fresh cheese if a goat has been milked recently. The cheese is tangy and faintly grassy, crumbly at the edges where it has dried. Alongside the bread is pottage, its contents shifting with the seasons. Today, perhaps it's made from yellow peas simmered slowly with onion and a pinch of whatever herbs the garden still offers. On rare and lucky days, there might be a scrap of pork. Pig keeping is common, and in some villages, pigs are driven into the woods to forage for acorns. When a pig is slaughtered often in the colder months, when meat will keep longer, every part is used. The fresh meat is eaten quickly, boiled or roasted, if there's enough fuel for a fire hot enough. Fat is rendered and stored intestines cleaned and used as casings for sausages, blood collected for puddings. Even the head is boiled to make a rich broth. For the poor, this is abundance. But abundance is fleeting. A salted joint of pork might be kept for weeks, shaved into thin slices to flavor stews. Salt is expensive, so meat preservation is done sparingly. Still, a morsel of cured pork in your pottage transforms it into something heartier, more sustaining. And the smell as it cooks, smoky, rich, and heavy with promise, draws every nose toward the hearth. After dinner, work resumes. In the fields, you bend to the soil, turning it over with heavy spades, scattering seed with a careful hand. Each seed is potential bread, potential life. At home, the work is quieter, but no less important. Grain must be winnowed, dried beans, sorted vegetables, stored. If there is milk, it must be churned or set to curdle for cheese. Brewing might be underway, the scent of malted grain rising with the steam from the cauldron. By afternoon, the pace of work slows slightly. Some women take the chance to mend clothes, spin wool, or weave. Children gather twigs for kindling or run errands between cottages. And always the pot on the hearth bubbles gently. Supper will be lighter than dinner bread again, perhaps dipped in broth left from midday, or porridge made from oats cooked slowly in water or milk. In summer, fresh greens might brighten the bowl. In winter, perhaps a turnip or two diced small so they soften quickly. On feast days, the rhythm changes. The church calendar dictates many such days when fasting from meat is required. For the poor, this often changes little, since meat is rare anyway. Fish becomes the permitted indulgence: salted herring, smoked eel, perhaps a few small freshwater fish caught nearby. Monasteries sometimes distribute fish on these days, a rare kindness that is gratefully received. Boiled and served with bread, the fish provides a welcome change from the endless rotation of beans and cabbage. Seasonal treats also appear in the diet. In early summer, the first strawberries are gathered, their sweetness almost shocking after months of plain fare. In autumn, apples are eaten fresh or cooked into a kind of simple stew with honey, if any can be had. Honey is the only real sweetener, for most sugar exists, but it is an exotic luxury far beyond a peasant's means. A comb of honey is treasure, golden, fragrant, and rich. It might be saved for a special day, shared among the family in small, sticky mouthfuls. The winter months are the hardest. Root vegetables dwindle, stored cabbages begin to rot at the edges. The bread is often heavier now, made with whatever grain remains, sometimes stretched with bean flour, or even ground acorns to make it last. The flavor is bitter, the texture dense, but it fills the stomach. In these months, hunger is a constant gnawing presence. You eat enough to keep moving, never enough to feel truly satisfied. And yet there is comfort in the familiar. The creak of the cottage door, the smell of smoke and simmering broth, the shared warmth of bodies gathered close to the hearth, these make the food taste better than it otherwise might. In the dim light, you tear a piece of bread, dip it into your bowl, and let the steam rise to your face. You chew slowly, letting each bite linger. This is your life, day after day, year after year, and somehow it is enough. Later, as the family settles in for the night, the bread left from supper is set aside for morning. It will be a little staler then, but still serviceable. The pot is hung away from the embers to cool, ready to be reheated at dawn. Outside, the village falls silent, save for the occasional lowing of cattle or the bark of a dog. In the darkness, you can almost hear the fields breathing, waiting for the return of sun and growth. You lie down on the straw-filled mattress, pulling the rough blanket close. Your stomach is neither empty nor full, your mind neither troubled nor at peace. Tomorrow will bring bread and pottage again, perhaps a little cheese if fortune smiles. And so it will continue, season after season, in the long, unbroken thread of medieval life. The first light of dawn seeps into the cottage again, soft and gray, filtering through the small, unglazed window. The air carries the faint chill of the night, and your breath curls in tiny clouds before you as you sit up. A dull clatter from the hearth tells you someone is already tending the fire, coaxing last night's embers back to life. You can smell bread not fresh baked, but yesterday's loaf being warmed near the coals just enough to take the stiffness from its crust. You reach for a slice, coarse and dark, the bran rough against your fingers. It's dipped quickly into a mug of small ale before being bitten into the chew, dense and slightly sour. This is breakfast, though no one calls it that. It is simply the first mouthful of the day, taken before the body begins its work. There is no lingering, no indulgence, only the quick satisfaction of the stomach before the long hours ahead. Outside, the frost has laid a thin lace over the thatch and the bare branches of the hedges. The village lane is quiet, except for the muffled thump of boots and clogs on frozen ground as people begin their morning tasks. In one yard, a man chops wood, the sound carrying clear in the still air. In another, a woman kneels to milk a goat, her breath mingling with the animals in soft puffs of steam. The thin stream of milk falls into the pail, warm and fragrant, to be strained and set aside. Some will be drunk, as is more will be made into soft cheese or butter if there's enough to churn. You take the narrow track toward the stream, a wooden bucket in your hand. Fetching water is a daily ritual repeated by nearly everyone in the village. The water is cold and clear, though you know well enough that looks can be deceiving. Boiling or brewing is safer. On the way back, you pass the mill again, its wheel turning slowly in the pale light. The sound of grinding stone is steady, almost soothing, as if the earth itself were whispering its work. Back at the cottage, the water is poured into the great blackened pot hanging over the fire. Into it go dried peas, split and yellow, to be softened by the slow boil. Later they will be joined by chopped onion, and perhaps a shred of salted pork if any remains. This is pottage in its simplest form, nourishing, filling, and unpretentious. It will sit on the hearth for hours, thickening into the day's main meal. Mid-morning you step outside again. The village is fully awake now, the smoke from dozens of hearths curling upward into the pale sky. Beyond the cottages, the fields stretch out, furrowed and waiting. In one, a man drives a plow pulled by a team of oxen, the heavy blade turning the damp soil into long, dark ribbons. He walks slowly, each step measured, the oxen leaning into the harness with quiet determination. This plowed earth will one day be the bread in your hands, but not for many months yet. Near the edge of the common land, you see a group of women bent low, gathering what winter still offers. It is meager, a few hardy cabbages, the stubborn green tips of leeks pushing up through frost-hardened soil, the odd parsnip dug from its hiding place. These small finds will add variety to the pottage, turning it from purely fuel into something a touch more flavorful. Herbs, too, have their place, even in winter. Dried sage and parsley, kept from the autumn harvest, will be crumbled into the pot, lending a faint aroma that lifts the spirits, even if it does little for the belly's fullness. By midday, the cottage is filled with the warm, savory scent of the simmering stew. The table is bare, but for a loaf of bread, and a wedge of cheese wrapped in cloth. The cheese is crumbly at the edges, fresh in the middle, and its tang cuts through the starch of the bread. Each person takes a portion, dipping bread into the thickened pottage, scraping the last bits from the wooden bowls. It is a quiet meal, but a satisfying one enough to keep muscles steady for the work yet to come. After eating, you walk toward the far end of the village where the path leads into a patch of woodland. This is a place of quiet opportunity. Here you can gather firewood, hunt for mushrooms in the right season, or cut hazel rods for making baskets. In autumn, the woods are rich with nuts and berries, but now in winter they offer little but the promise of fuel and the occasional rabbit, if luck is with you. Catching one requires skill and patience, setting snares along well-worn paths, checking them at dawn or dusk. Meat from such a catch is precious, stretched as far as possible, roasted whole, if large enough, stewed into the pottage if not. In the heart of the wood, you find a small clearing where others have been before you. The signs are faint, but clear to practiced eyes, a snare loop left hanging a pile of wood neatly stacked for drying. These shared spaces are unspoken agreements among the poor, a network of quiet cooperation where no one takes more than they can use without cause. Breaking that trust risks more than just hard feelings. It can unravel the fragile threads that hold the community together. By late afternoon, you return with an armful of wood and a bundle of dry twigs for kindling. The fire is fed, the pottage stirred, and the family begins to settle in. Supper is much like dinner, though smaller, another slice of bread perhaps spread with a smear of soft cheese or dipped in the still warm stew. If there is any milk, it might be warmed with a little honey for the children, a rare treat, smooth and sweet. As the sky deepens to blue and then black, the village quiets. The hens are shut in their coops, goats and cows tethered safely for the night. Inside, the flickering firelight casts long shadows on the low ceiling, the air thick with the mingled scents of wood smoke, earth, and food. You sit back, your belly warmed by the simple meal, and listen to the low murmur of voices, the occasional crack of a log in the hearth. It strikes you, as it often does, how much of life here revolves around the steady rhythm of food. Planting, tending, harvesting, storing, preparing, sharing, each season folds into the next. Each meal a thread in the fabric of survival. And though the fare is humble, though it rarely changes, it sustains you in a way that is almost comforting in its predictability. Tomorrow will bring bread and pottage again, perhaps with a different vegetable or herb, perhaps not. But it will be enough. The morning frost has deepened, settling in tiny white crystals over every thatched roof and bare hedgerow. You wake to the low hum of the village, stirring a sound you have come to recognize as the music of survival, the scrape of a wooden stool on the floor, the muted cough of someone rising from a straw bed, the faint shuffle of boots over packed earth. From somewhere nearby, you catch the warm, yeasty scent of dough rising ready to be baked in the communal oven. It is baking day for your household, and that means carrying your dough down the lane to the oven, maintained for everyone's use. The oven stands like a squat stone sentinel near the village green, its domed shape blackened from years of use. On baking days, there is a quiet bustle as people arrive in turn, carrying their loaves wrapped in cloth to protect them from the cold. The oven keeper tends the fire, judging when the heat is just right to slide in the bread. Your loaves, heavy with barley and rye, are set carefully onto the hot stone floor. They will bake for hours, slowly turning crusty and dark. There is a pride in this process, even if the bread is plain. The moment you lift it from the oven, you know you have secured the week's foundation bread enough to see you through if you portion it wisely. Fresh from the oven, the loaves smell earthy and comforting, a scent that seems to promise safety against hunger. While the bread bakes, you take a short walk beyond the last row of cottages. The low winter sun casts long shadows across the open fields where the stubbled remnants of last season's crops poke through the frost. Along the hedgerow, a few hardy herbs cling to life. You pluck some sprigs of rosemary, their fragrance sharp and resinous even in the cold. These will go into tonight's pottage, lending it a note of brightness that winter rarely offers. Closer to the woods, you see a boy with a small wicker trap, clearly hoping to catch something for his family's supper. Rabbits and hares are quick and shy, but in lean months, snares set at their narrow runs can mean the difference between another night of thin broth and one blessed with meat. Hunting larger game is forbidden to you. The deer in the forest belong to the Lord. But the smaller creatures of the hedges and undergrowth sometimes find their way into a poor man's pot, provided no one sees. By midday, the bread is ready. You lift the loaves from the oven, their crusts hard and mottled. A little steam escapes as you wrap them back in cloth for the walk home. The temptation to tear into one is strong, but you know that fresh bread goes stale more quickly, and so you leave them intact until the evening meal. Still, the smell follows you like a quiet promise. At home, the day's pottage is already underway. The pot holds a base of lentils and chopped onion thickening as it simmers. Into it, you crumble a pinch of the rosemary you gathered, watching the green flecks vanish into the golden broth. A tiny cube of salted pork is dropped in small enough to stretch the precious store, but enough to give the whole dish a depth of flavor that plain vegetables cannot match. The aroma fills the room, rich and savory, and even the children perk up, hovering nearby as the pot bubbles. Dinner is eaten with fresh bread, still warm enough to steam in the cool air. You tear thick slices, dipping them into the pottage so they soften, then lifting them to your mouth while the broth still drips from the crust. The rosemary comes through subtly, a reminder that even in hardship, flavor matters. For a few moments, the room is quiet, except for the sound of chewing and the clink of spoons against wooden bowls. After the meal, there is work to do. The women wash the bowls at the bucket, scrubbing them with handfuls of damp straw before rinsing them in the stream. Men repair tools, the wooden haft of a spade, the blade of a sickle, in readiness for the next day's labor. Children collect the crumbs that have fallen to the table, popping them into their mouths with quick, guilty glances. Nothing is wasted here. As the afternoon light fades, you join others heading toward the woods with baskets. Even in winter, there is foraging to be done, fallen branches for kindling, perhaps a clutch of late mushrooms hiding under the leaf litter. Most of the time you return with little more than fuel for the fire, but occasionally fortune smiles. Once you recall, you stumbled upon a small, wild beehive tucked into the hollow of a tree. That day's honey was the sweetest thing you had tasted all year, shared sparingly among the family. By dusk, the village green is quiet again. The oven has cooled its mouth closed against the night. Smoke curls from every chimney, mingling above the roofs in a pale haze. Inside your cottage, the fire burns low but steady, the light flickering across the rough plastered walls. Supper is simpler than dinner bread again, perhaps with a slice of cheese or a bowl of thin oat porridge. Tonight, there's a little leftover pottage reheated until the lentils have broken down completely, turning the broth thick and velvety. The conversation turns to the next market day. Perhaps you will take a few eggs to sell or a skein of spun wool. In return, you might bring back salt always needed for preserving food, or a piece of dried fish to liven the pottage in the coming week. Salted herring is the usual choice, cheap, plentiful, and strong enough in flavor that even a small piece can transform a whole pot of stew. After supper, the last of the bread is wrapped and set aside, the pot rinsed and hung again over the hearth. You settle near the fire, stretching your legs toward the heat. The smell of baking still lingers faintly on your clothes, mingling with the sharper scent of smoke. The children doze on the floor, their heads resting on each other's shoulders. Outside, the night presses close, the sky cold and clear above the silent fields. It's in this quiet, with your belly modestly filled and the week's bread safe on the shelf, that you feel a small, steady contentment. The food may be plain, but it is yours. It comes from your hands, your land, your skill. And though the seasons will turn, and hunger may nip at your heels again tonight, you are warm, and there is bread enough for tomorrow. The pale light of morning seeps through the cracks in the shutters, soft but insistent. You wake to the distant toll of the church bell calling the village to its quiet daily rhythm. The air is cool and faintly damp, the smell of yesterday's fire still lingering in the air. Somewhere nearby, a hen clucks softly, followed by the muffled footsteps of someone scattering feed. You reach for a heel of bread from the cloth-wrapped loaf, the crust hard from a night's rest, but still carrying the earthy aroma of the communal oven. It is dipped into a cup of small ale, the bread soaking up the faint tang before you bite down. The chew is steady, the taste simple barley and rye mingled with the ghost of yesterday's rosemary. The first meal is always modest, a quiet prelude to the day's work. Outside, the air is heavy with wood smoke curling from low chimneys. The village lane is slick with the night's dew, small rivulets running toward the ditches. In the distance, the oxen are already in the fields, their broad shapes moving slowly through the mist. The plowmen lean into their work, each furrow a slow promise of the grain to come. You join a group heading toward the common pasture. A few cows graze there, their breath steaming in the cold air. The milk they give is thin in winter, but still precious. From it comes soft cheese, fresh butter on rare days, and sometimes a richer pottage when mixed with barley or oats. The smell of the pasture is strong, damp earth-crushed grass, and the musky scent of the animals themselves. The rhythm of tending them is as constant as the turning of the seasons. Along the path you pass the low wattle fence of a kitchen garden. Inside, leeks stand tall and green against the pale soil, their roots safe in the cold earth. A woman bends to cut a few, her knife flashing in the weak sun. She drops them into a basket already holding a handful of turnips, their pale skins streaked with soil. These will find their way into a pot before nightfall, sliced and simmered until they soften and surrender their sweetness to the broth. You continue toward the edge of the village where a small stream runs under a wooden footbridge. Here the water is clear enough to reflect the sky, though it moves sluggishly between frost-rimmed banks. A boy crouches near the edge, peering into the shallows. In his hands is a crude net made from twine and willow, just large enough to catch the tiny fish that dart among the stones. These are not much for eating, barely a mouthful each, but on a lucky day, a small string of them might be fried quickly on the hearthstone or added whole to the evening's pottage. By midday, the heart of the day's meal is taking shape. The pot over your own hearth holds a base of barley, its grains swollen and soft from hours in the simmering water. Into it have gone leeks, turnip slices, and a small pinch of dried parsley saved from the last autumn harvest. There is no meat today, but the slow cooking draws every ounce of flavor from what you have. The air in the cottage is warm and fragrant, a welcome contrast to the damp chill outside. The bread is brought out and cut into thick slices. Each is used to scoop the pottage, the crust softening as it soaks up the hot broth. The children eat quietly, dipping and chewing, until their bowls are empty. The adults follow suit, pausing only to wipe a hand across a tired brow or glance toward the fire to check the pot's simmer. After dinner, the work of the day resumes. Some head to the fields to mend hedges, driving in sharpened stakes and weaving them with cut willow to keep animals out of the planted strips. Others remain in the village, spinning wool into thread or carding the raw fibers until they are soft and ready for the loom. You join a pair of women preparing dried beans for storage, sorting through them for signs of rot or insects. Each handful is inspected, each sound bean dropped into a sack to be tied and hung in the loft. The afternoon stretches on the weak sunlight, slipping slowly toward the horizon. In one yard, a pig is being slaughtered. The cold weather makes it the right time to do so. A small crowd gathers not out of morbid curiosity, but to take part in the work and share in the rewards. The meat is divided, the fat rendered the blood caught for making puddings. The smell of fresh meat cooking is rich and intoxicating, and for once the promise of supper is more than just bread and vegetables. You are given a small portion of the pork, perhaps a scrap of shoulder and some trimmings. Back in your cottage, these are dropped into the pot, still bubbling with the remains of dinner's pottage. The meat will soften there, the fat melting into the broth, transforming it into something far more indulgent than usual. Tonight's meal will be hearty, and you will remember it for days after. As darkness falls, the village gathers in the glow of its hearths. Supper is eaten slowly, the meat savored bite by bite. The broth clings to the bread, its flavor deep and full. The children grin with greasy lips, their faces lit by firelight. It is a rare feast in a life of plain fare, and everyone knows it. When the bowls are clean and the fire burns low, you step outside for a moment. The sky is deep and clear, stars scattered across its black sweep. The village is quiet, but for the occasional murmur from behind a shutter or the muffled bark of a dog. The air smells of wood smoke and the faint, lingering sweetness of roasted pork. Standing there, you think of the day's meals, plain, predictable, punctuated by rare moments of abundance. This is the diet of the poor in medieval times, a steady march of bread and pottage ale and cheese with the occasional bright spark of something richer. It is not a life of plenty, but it is a life sustained, stitched together from the gifts of the land, the labor of your hands, and the quiet endurance that carries you from season to season. Tomorrow, the bread will be a little staler, the pottage a little plainer, but tonight, you carry the memory of warmth and fullness into your bed, and that is enough. Morning arrives quietly, its pale light spilling over the frost-silvered thatch and lingering in the air like breath. You rise slowly, feeling the stiffness of the cold night in your joints. The embers in the hearth are faint, but with a few careful breaths and a handful of dry twigs, the fire stirs again, sending the first thin coil of smoke curling toward the low ceiling. The smell of wood smoke mixes with the faint sourness of yesterday's ale still sitting in a jug by the wall. Breakfast, as ever, is no more than a fragment of bread softened in ale or warm milk. You chew without ceremony, the bread rough against your teeth, the ale thin and faintly bitter. Outside the village lane is still shaded in the early light, the frost crunching under the boots of those heading out first to the fields. The oxen move slowly, their breath steaming their wide hooves, sinking into the ruts left from yesterday. Today is a day for foraging, though the ground is hard and stingy with its offerings. You set out with a small basket, walking past the edge of the common toward the low woodland beyond. The hedgerows are bare, but for the occasional dried hip or berry clinging stubbornly to its stem. You pluck them carefully, their skins wrinkled, their flavor sharp and sour. These will find their way into a broth later, lending it a whisper of sweetness and a spark of much-needed vitamin. Along the frozen path, you spot the faint trail of a rabbit, its tiny prints pressed into the frost. You follow them a short way until they vanish under the tangled roots of a hawthorn. Someone has set a snare there, a loop of cord waiting in silence. Whether it will catch anything today is a matter of patience and fortune. Such traps are common in these months, silent sentinels of hunger waiting for the small miracle of movement. By mid-morning you return with your modest basket, a few rose hips, a handful of withered greens you found near the stream, where the earth is softer, and a small bundle of twigs for kindling. It is not much, but every addition to the pot matters. At the cottage, the hearth is already busy, a pot of pottage simmering slowly. Today's version is a pale broth made from barley water with a few cabbage leaves, onions, and the last of the beans from the store. Into it, you drop the greens you found watching them sink and soften in the heat. The bread, now a few days old, is sliced with a steady hand. The crust is firm, the crumb dense, but when dipped into the hot broth, it becomes soft enough to eat easily. Dinner is plain, but the warmth fills you, chasing away the cold that has settled deep into your bones. You take comfort in the steam rising from your bowl, the rhythmic sound of spoons against wood, and the shared quiet of the meal. After dinner, the village hums with its own small industries. A group of women gather in one yard to spin wool, their distaffs balanced against their hips, the fibers twisting and tightening into thread under practiced fingers. The rhythmic motion is soothing the low murmur of conversation, blending with the faint whistle of wind through the hedges. Wool spun in winter will be woven into cloth when the days grow longer, ready to clothe the family or to sell at market for precious coin. Not far away, a man works at a small bench outside his cottage, carving wooden spoons from a block of seasoned ash. The shavings curl away in pale ribbons scattering at his feet. Such spoons are traded among neighbors, swapped for a measure of grain or a few eggs. In the medieval village, food is rarely just a product of one's own labor. It is tied to a web of exchange of favors given and returned of quiet agreements that keep everyone afloat. By late afternoon, the air sharpens again. The shadows grow long and blue across the lane, and smoke thickens from every chimney. Supper will be lighter than dinner, perhaps oat porridge stirred until thick and eaten with a drizzle of milk, if the goat has given enough that day. If not, it may be bread alone, chewed slowly in the firelight. Sometimes, for a treat, the porridge might be sweetened with a spoon of honey, if such a treasure is still in the house. This evening, though, there is a small surprise. A neighbor stops by with a few salted sprats wrapped in cloth, part of a trade for some spun wool given earlier in the month. The fish are tiny, their bodies stiff with salt, but when rinsed and dropped into the pottage, they lend it a rich, briny depth that makes the whole room smell of the sea even here far inland. The children watch eagerly, their noses twitching at the unfamiliar scent. The fish cook quickly, their flesh flaking into the broth. The bread tonight is dipped into this new mixture, each bite carrying a faint tang of the coast. It is a rare flavor, something to be remembered, and you savor it slowly, letting the warmth spread through you. Such moments are small, but precious, a reminder that even in the narrow limits of the poor man's kitchen, there can still be surprise, still a change in the long rhythm of sameness. After supper, the cottage settles into its evening rhythm. The fire is built up with the last of the day's wood, casting a golden glow across the faces gathered close. The talk is soft news from the next village, the health of the animals, the prospect of snow before the week is out. You listen half lost in the steady crackle of the fire, the warmth creeping up from your feet toward your chest. Outside, the night draws down thick and silent. The stars wheel overhead, bright and cold against the black sky. The frost is already settling on the thatch again, promising another hard morning. You close the cottage door against it, holding the heat inside like a hoarded treasure. The bread is wrapped again, the pot scraped clean, the spoons set aside until the morning. In the quiet that follows, you stretch out on the straw-filled mattress, the rough blanket pulled close. Your stomach holds the gentle comfort of the fish-flavored broth, your mind, the memory of the day's simple labors. Sleep comes slowly, the sounds of the hearth, and the deep breathing of those around you weaving together into a lullaby as old as the village itself. The morning breaks pale and brittle, with a faint crust of ice along the edges of the stream. You rise to the sound of the goat shifting in its pen, her low bleat carrying across the cold air. Your hands are stiff as you pull on your woolen tunic, but there's work to be done before the sun lifts fully over the hedgerows. The goat is patient as you kneel beside her, your fingers finding their rhythm in the milking. The pail fills slowly, the milk warm against the cold of your hands. You strain it carefully through a cloth to remove stray bits of straw and hair. Some of this milk will be drunk today, but most will be left to sour gently, then strained into a soft, fresh cheese by evening. In winter, this cheese is a welcome source of nourishment, rich compared to the bread and pottage that dominate the table. Back inside, the hearth has been coaxed to life again. The faint smell of yesterday's fire still lingers in the air, mixed with the sharper scent of smoke that clings to every surface. You tear a slice of bread from the loaf, harder now after several days, and warm it briefly over the embers. This softens the crust, just enough to make it chewable without strain. You dip it into a little milk, the warmth seeping into your fingers, and eat in quiet mouthfuls. After this small meal, you head toward the common fields. The air is still the frost crunching under your boots as you walk. Across the expanse of open strips, men are at work mending fences and hedges, while others turn the soil in preparation for spring planting. You pass the low stone wall that borders the Lord's domain, the best land reserved for his crops. On the far side, neat rows of winter wheat stand green against the pale earth, a silent reminder of the hierarchy that governs every bite of food in the village. Near the edge of the fields, a few women are gathering rushes from the wetter ground. These will be spread on the floors of cottages, replaced when they grow dirty, and sometimes plaited into mats. It is slow, cold work, the rushes stiff with frost. They also gather cattail roots from the marshy edges, edible if roasted or boiled long enough, though bland. Still, in the hungry gap of early spring, such roots can help fill a pot when stores are running low. By mid-morning, you return with a bundle of rushes over one shoulder and a few cattail roots in hand. Back at the cottage, you set the roots by the hearth to dry before cooking. The day's main meal will be a modest one, a pottage of oats cooked slowly in water, thickened with chopped onion, and the last of yesterday's cabbage. A handful of dried beans soaked overnight will soften in the simmering heat, swelling and splitting until their insides are creamy. While the pottage cooks, you take a small jar of last summer's honey from its shelf. Only a spoonful remains, but on a day when the wind is sharp and the cold seeps into your bones, it feels worth using. A little is stirred into warm milk for the children, turning their cups into something almost luxurious. The sweetness is brief, but welcome the taste of sunlit days folded into the heart of winter. Dinner is served while the light is still strong outside. Thick slices of bread are set beside the bowls, and the oat bean pottage is ladled out, steam rising into the air. The cattail roots are sliced and added to the pot, their mild flavor taking on the onion's bite and the oat's earthiness. You chew slowly, feeling the warmth spread from your mouth to your fingers and toes. It is not a feast, but it is enough, and enough is everything. After dinner, you walk down the lane toward the mill. The water wheel turns slowly, dripping from its paddles, the grinding stones inside murmuring steadily. You carry with you a small sack of grain, your share from last season's harvest. The miller greets you with a nod, his hands dusted white. The grain is poured into the hopper, and the slow grind begins turning kernels into coarse meal. When it's done, you pay your toll, a portion of your grain kept by the miller, and carry the rest home. This flour will become bread, the anchor of the week's meals. The afternoon drifts toward evening, the shadows stretching long across the lane. You pause by the garden plot to check the stored cabbages, their leaves bound tight against the cold. A few outer leaves have begun to yellow, but the hearts are still crisp. You harvest one for tomorrow's pottage, shaking off the frost and tucking it under your arm. Inside supper is a quieter affair. The oat pottage is reheated thinner now, almost a broth. Bread is cut into smaller pieces, each dipped carefully to make it last. There is no cheese tonight, no fish or meat, only the slow comfort of hot food on a cold evening. The rushes gathered this morning are spread fresh on the floor, their scent faintly green beneath the smoke and steam. Later, as the last light fades, you sit by the hearth, mending a woolen glove. The thread pulls through the thick cloth with a soft hiss, your fingers stiff but patient. Around you, the household moves slowly into rest, the goat settled in her pen, the last embers banked for the night. The bread wrapped tightly against the chill. Outside, the cold is sharp enough to bite your cheeks, but inside there is still warmth. You step out briefly, before closing the door, looking across the darkened village. The thatch gleams faintly under the moonlight, the air utterly still. In the distance, a dog's bark carries over the frost-hardened ground. The smell of wood smoke lingers in the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of the honey you tasted earlier. Back inside, you lie down on the straw mattress, the blanket rough but heavy over you. Your belly is not full, but it is satisfied, the pottage still warming you from the inside out. Tomorrow will bring bread again, and perhaps cheese if the goat is generous. The days are much the same, but in their sameness lies a quiet stability, a rhythm that holds the hunger at bay and keeps you steady through the long medieval winter. The morning arrives under a low gray sky, the kind that seems to press the air closer to the earth. you wake to the faint tapping of sleet against the shutters and the gentle creak of the rafters under the weight of the damp. The hearth is nothing but a hollow of cold ash, but with practiced hands you stir it back to life, coaxing a tongue of flame from the last embers and feeding it with twigs until the smoke begins to curl lazily upward. Today will be a day of staying close to home. The weather has seen to that. The lane outside is slick and half frozen, a patchwork of muddy slush and frost. You can hear the soft splashing of hooves as someone leads a cow toward the common pasture, its breath rising in clouds before its head. The air smells of wet earth and smoke with a hint of sour hay from the byre. You begin the day with a small wedge of cheese from the goat's milk gathered earlier in the week. It is crumbly, slightly tangy, and you eat it with a slice of bread warmed over the hearth. The bread's crust is hard, but the heat softens it just enough for your teeth. A mug of small ale completes the modest meal, its faint bitterness familiar now as much a part of mornings as the smell of smoke and the feel of rough cloth against your skin. With the weather keeping you indoors, the day's work is the quiet kind. Wool needs to be carded and spun, the tangled tufts teased apart until they're soft and airy. You set the distaff at your side and begin twisting the fibers into thread, the rhythm settling into your hands as the fire snaps softly in the hearth. Around you, the cottage carries its own winter sounds, the creak of the roof beams, the occasional pop of a knot in the burning wood, the distant cluck of hens shifting in the coop. By mid-morning, the pottage is already simmering. Today's version is made from dried peas and barley with a few slivers of onion and carrot for sweetness. The smell is earthy and mild, filling the air and wrapping itself around you like an extra blanket. A neighbor stops by, stamping the wet from her boots, and offers you a small bundle of dried herbs in exchange for some spun wool. You take the trade gladly. The herbs will bring a freshness to the pot that winter meals often lack. A pinch of them goes in straight away, releasing a bright green scent that mingles with the slow-cooked peas. When dinner is ready, the bowls are filled generously. Bread is torn into chunks and dropped into the pottage, softening until it becomes almost part of the stew itself. The heat seeps into your hands through the wood of the bowl, the steam warming your face. It is a simple meal, but it fills the belly and leaves you ready for the afternoon's work. After eating, you step outside for a short while. The sleet has eased to a fine drizzle, and the air carries the clean scent of wet earth. You walk to the edge of the common to check the goat who is sheltering under the low branches of an ash tree. She nibbles at the sparse winter grass, her coat beaded with moisture. You scratch her gently behind the ears before leading her back toward the byre, where she'll be warmer through the night. On the way back, you pass the stream swollen slightly from the day's melt. The water runs brown with silt, but along its banks, a few green shoots are pushing up a quiet promise that spring will come again. You stoop to gather a handful of these early nettles, careful to avoid their sting. Once boiled, they will lose their bite and add both color and nourishment to the evening's pot. Back in the cottage, you hang your cloak near the fire and set the nettles aside until supper. The afternoon slips into its slower pace. There is more spinning to be done, mending for the children's tunics and the careful scraping of a wooden bowl that has begun to roughen with use. You think ahead to the market day, coming soon. Perhaps you'll take some thread to trade, perhaps a few eggs if the hens are generous. In return, you hope for salt, maybe even a small wedge of hard cheese from another's goat or cow. By the time the light begins to fade, the pottage from earlier is reheated for supper. The nettles are chopped and stirred in their deep green bright against the pale barley and peas. The flavor is fresh, almost grassy, a welcome change from the usual winter fare. Bread is sliced thinly this time, each piece savored slowly dipped into the green-flecked broth until the crust softens and the flavors mingle. The talk around the hearth is soft, threaded with the sound of the wind pressing against the shutters. You discuss the state of the stored vegetables, the dwindling stock of beans, the need to ration the last of the honey. There's comfort in planning together and facing the season as one household. Even when the choices are few, the making of them feels like an act of quiet control against the uncertainty beyond your walls. After supper, you bank the fire carefully, pushing the glowing embers into a mound and covering them with ash to keep them alive until morning. The smell of the day's cooking still lingers in the air, mingled with the damp scent of wool drying near the hearth. Outside, the drizzle has stopped, leaving the night damp and still. Before bed, you step out once more. The moon is hidden behind clouds, but the wet earth glistens faintly in the darkness. The village is quiet, save for the occasional rustle of thatch under a bird settling for the night. You close the door against the cold, grateful for the simple shelter, the simple meal, and the small fire that will carry you into another day. You lie down on the straw mattress, pulling the blanket close. The taste of nettles and peas lingers faintly, a reminder of the small variety you managed to gather today. Your hands are tired from spinning your shoulders, warm from the fire's glow. Sleep comes easily in this kind of steady, simple life each day, blending gently into the next, each meal, another stitch in the long, slow fabric of medieval survival. The night has been still and cold, and when you wake, the frost has settled so thickly on the thatch and hedges that it looks as though the village has been dusted with flour. Your breath curls in pale plumes as you sit up, the blanket slipping from your shoulders. The embers in the hearth are faint, but a few careful pokes and a sprinkling of kindling bring back the glow. Soon, the first faint crackle of firewood fills the cottage, and the air begins to stir with warmth. Bread is the first thought of the day. The loaf is hard now, several days past baking, but a little time near the fire softens the crust. You break a piece into your wooden cup, pour in some warm milk from the goat, and let it soak until it turns into a rustic kind of porridge. It is not fancy, but it is filling enough to carry you into the morning's work. Outside, the lane is hushed under the frost, every footstep crunching sharply in the quiet. Your breath hangs before you as you head toward the common field. The plowed strips are frozen hard, their furrows pale under the weak sun. The oxen stand together in the corner, their hides steaming faintly, their eyes half closed against the cold. You stop to help a neighbor scatter hay for them, the sweet, dry smell of it rising in the frigid air. A group of villagers is already working near the edge of the common, mending the wattle fence that keeps the animals from straying into the planted fields. The woven hurdles of hazel and willow are sturdy but need constant upkeep. You take a turn weaving new rods into place, your fingers stiff in the cold. This work is as much about protecting the future harvest as it is about keeping order. Without barriers, the hungry animals would make quick work of any green shoot. By mid-morning, the weather has warmed just enough to loosen the frost on the cabbages stored in the garden pit. You pull back the covering of straw and earth lifting out a firm, pale head. The outer leaves are tough and discolored, but inside the heart is crisp and fresh. You brush off the clinging soil and carry it back to the cottage, a prize in the depths of winter. The hearth pot is already simmering with the start of the day's pottage, dried peas softened in water wool, with a small handful of barley. You chop the cabbage coarsely and add it to the pot, its pale leaves wilting into the steam. A pinch of dried thyme from the summer garden follows, filling the room with a scent that is both sharp and comforting. Lunch comes earlier than usual today, hunger stirred by the cold air and the work in the fields. Thick slices of bread are torn and set beside each bowl. The pottage is ladled out, the cabbage lending sweetness to the peas, the thyme adding its faint peppery note. You eat steadily, the heat of the food reaching your fingers and toes long before the bowl is empty. After the meal, you walk to the stream to fetch water. The edges are frozen, but the current runs steadily beneath. You fill your bucket carefully, the cold biting at your hands as you lift it clear. On the way back, you stop to speak with an older man who is tending to a small patch of turnips. He tells you he's keeping them in the ground for as long as the weather allows to keep them fresh. You make a mental note: root vegetables last longer this way, spared from rot in storage. In the afternoon, work turns to mending. A worn cloak is patched at the shoulder with a scrap of wool from last year's shearing. The stitches are neat, your hand steady. Warm clothing is as important as a full belly in these months. Without it, no amount of food will keep out the cold. Beside you, someone is twisting thin strips of willow into rope, the fibers creaking softly as they tighten. This rope will serve for tying bundles, repairing hurdles, even setting snares for small game. By late day, a neighbor stops in carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside are 3 salted herrings, part of his own stores, offered in thanks for help with fence mending. The smell is strong, sharp with brine, and you know it will fill the cottage when cooked. You thank him sincerely. Fish like this will keep for months, but tonight you will cook one fresh from the salt. As dusk settles, the herring is rinsed and laid in the pot with more cabbage and a small onion. The broth quickly takes on the deep, savory scent of the fish, its briny edge mellowing in the heat. Bread is sliced, its crust rough against your hand, and set beside the bowls. When the fish is ready, you flake it into the broth, careful to catch the fine bones, and ladle the mixture into waiting bowls. The first mouthful is strong and salty, the cabbage soft and sweet against it. The bread soaks up the broth, each bite carrying both land and sea in its flavor. The children eat with surprising speed, the novelty of fish a rare pleasure. For you, it is a reminder of the strange threads that tie a small inland village to faraway coasts, merchants and markets, salted barrels and long journeys, all condensed into a simple winter meal. After supper, the evening quiets into its usual rhythm. The fire burns low, casting a warm flicker over the rough walls. Outside, the frost is returning, spreading across the fields under a clear, star-cold sky. Inside, the smell of the fish still lingers, mingling with the wood smoke. The salted herrings, not eaten tonight, are hung in a cool, dry place ready for the weeks to come. Before bed, you step outside for a moment, the air sharp and crystalline in your lungs. The village sleeps under its white veil, the only sound the distant creak of a bare branch in the wind. You turn back to the door, closing it on the cold, carrying the day's quiet satisfactions with you, the cabbage from the garden pit, the gift of herring, the warmth of a patched cloak. You settle into your bed, the blanket heavy over you, the straw mattress rustling softly. Tomorrow will bring bread and pottage again, perhaps with the second of the herrings. In this steady cycle, there is comfort and survival. The frost is deep again this morning, the kind that hardens the ruts in the lane until they feel like stone underfoot. When you stir from your blanket, the air inside the cottage is still and cold, each breath a visible wisp in the dim light. The embers are nearly gone, only the faintest glow hiding under the ash, but with patience you coax them back to life. Soon, a thin ribbon of smoke is drifting upward, carrying the first promise of warmth into the room. Your first meal is familiar, a piece of bread several days old, now softened in warm ale until it can be chewed without strain. You eat slowly, letting the heat seep into your fingers from the cup. Outside, the light is still pale, but the village is stirring. Somewhere a hen calls, and in the distance you hear the muffled thud of an axe splitting wood. Today your path leads toward the edge of the forest. There are rumors of early growth, green shoots hidden in the sheltered spaces where the frost can't quite reach. A few other villagers are already on the path, baskets and knives in hand. Foraging is never just for summer. Even in the depths of winter, the forest offers small gifts for those willing to search. The ground is hard under your boots, the leaves crisp with frost. Here and there you find the dark, glossy leaves of sorrel, sharp with a lemony tang when bitten. A handful of these will brighten a stew or be eaten raw for their fresh bite. Deeper in the undergrowth you uncover a patch of young nettles, their leaves still tender. With care, you pinch them low on the stem, avoiding the sting. Nettles will wilt and soften when boiled, adding both flavor and nourishment to the pot. You pass the old coppice where hazel poles have been cut in past years. New shoots are rising from the stumps, straight and strong, perfect for future hurdle making or tool handles. But that is work for another season. Today you keep your eyes on the ground, searching for mushrooms. Winter yields few, but you find a small clutch of oyster mushrooms on a fallen tree. Their pale caps are smooth and cool to the touch, promising a rare touch of umami in tonight's meal. By mid-morning, your basket holds a modest gathering, sorrel, nettles, mushrooms, and a small bundle of kindling collected along the way. The walk back to the village is quiet, the cold air biting your cheeks, the faint creak of frozen branches overhead. Smoke curls from chimneys as you draw near the cottages, the smell of cooking fires mingling with the earthy scent of your finds. The hearth welcomes you with its slow, steady heat. Into the pot go yesterday's barley and pea pottage stretched with water and stirred until smooth again. The nettles are chopped and dropped in turning the broth a deep green. The mushrooms follow their edges, curling slightly as they meet the heat. Last comes the sorrel added just before serving, so its brightness lingers. The room fills with a mingled scent, earthy mushrooms, sharp greens, the rich base of slow-cooked grains. Dinner is eaten with the usual bread, its crust tough but softened by dipping. The sorrel brings a pleasant tang, cutting through the heavier flavors of the barley. The mushrooms give it depth, the nettles a faint mineral bite. It is a richer bowl than usual, though still simple. You savor each spoonful, aware that meals like this are rare in winter. After eating, you help with the afternoon's tasks. There is wool to spin a pile of firewood to stack neatly under the overhang, and tools to check for the coming plowing season. The sun is weak but steady, throwing long shadows across the yard. The goat noses at a patch of frost-bitten grass, her breath puffing in little clouds. The hens scratch at the frozen ground, searching for whatever small life hides beneath. Later, you join a neighbor in the yard to help split kindling. The axe head bites deep into the seasoned wood, the scent of resin rising each time a log is split. The rhythm is steady lift, drop, split, a quiet music against the soft backdrop of the village. You trade talk about the stores of grain, the chances of snow before month's end, the faint signs that spring might come early. By late afternoon, the sky is already dimming. Supper will be smaller than dinner, the same pottage reheated, but with a little goat's milk stirred in for richness. The bread is sliced thinly to stretch the loaf another day. The milk softens the sharpness of the sorrel, blending it into a creamy, comforting bowlful. The mushrooms have deepened their flavor overnight, and the nettles have given all they had to the broth. The talk at the hearth is gentle, touched with the weariness of winter days. Someone mentions the coming Candlemas when the church blesses the candles for the year ahead. Such days mark time as much as they offer celebration, little milestones in the long winter stretch. Perhaps there will be a small feast or at least a change in the usual fare. After supper, you set the pot aside and bank the fire for the night. The cottage smells of smoke and greens, the faint tang of sorrel still in the air. Outside, the frost is creeping in again, silvering the thatch and tracing the edges of each wattle fence. The moon hangs low, a thin curve of light above the dark hedges. You step back inside and pull the blanket around your shoulders, the day's labors settling into your bones. The taste of nettles and mushrooms lingers faintly, a reminder of the forest's small generosity even in its leanest season. The bed is cool, the straw shifting softly as you lie down. Sleep comes slowly but surely, like the slow simmer of the day's pottage, steady quiet, and enough to carry you to morning. The morning is dim and muffled, as if the whole village has been wrapped in a thick woolen cloak. Overnight, a soft snowfall has covered the ground, smoothing away the ruts in the lane and bending the hedges under its weight. The air is still the kind of quiet that makes every sound, the crunch of boots, the creak of a door hinge, feel sharper, more deliberate. You wake slowly, drawing the blanket tighter around you before slipping from the bed. The hearth is dark, the ashes pale and cool. It takes patience to coax the fire back to life, feeding it with the driest twigs, cupping your hands to guide the breath into the embers. When the first flames catch, they glow warmly against the gray light seeping through the shutters. Your bread is now several days old, hard enough that a knife's edge hesitates before it cuts. You saw through a small slice and place it in a bowl, pouring warm ale over it until it softens enough to chew. This is the simplest of meals, but it steadies you for the work ahead. Outside, the snow muffles even the cluck of the hens and the lowing of the cattle on the common. The first task is to check the animals. The goat's pen is banked with straw to keep the cold at bay, but she greets you eagerly, breath steaming in the still air. You bring her to the byre to milk her hooves, clicking on the packed snow. The milk is warm in your hands, a small comfort against the winter morning. A little will be set aside for drinking. The rest will begin its slow transformation into soft cheese. With the goat tended, you take the path toward the common well. It is a short walk, but the snow makes each step deliberate. At the well, a few neighbors are already drawing water, their voices low in the morning hush. The buckets creak on their ropes, the water dark and glassy as it rises. You fill your own, the cold biting into your palms as you carry it home. Today's main meal will need the comfort of something hearty. You set barley to simmer in the pot, its slow thickening filling the cottage with a faint, nutty scent. From the garden pit you fetch one of the stored turnips, its skin pale and mottled, but firm under the frost. Peeled and diced, it joins the barley in the pot, softening as the hours pass. Mid-morning, you take a walk to the edge of the wood. The snow here is undisturbed, but for the light tracks of birds and the occasional rabbit. You check a snare set days before, finding it empty, the loop dusted with snow. Further along, a fallen branch offers enough dry wood to feed the hearth through the evening. You sling it over your shoulder, the scent of damp bark strong in the cold air. By midday, the barley and turnip pottage is ready. A small pinch of dried marjoram goes in its fragrance, a bright counterpoint to the heavier scent of the grain. Bread is sliced thinly now as the loaf grows smaller and set beside each bowl. The first spoonful is thick and warming the turnip, sweetening the barley's earthiness. The heat works its way from your chest outward, easing the stiffness from your fingers and toes. After dinner, the work turns to mending and preparation. A length of rope is repaired with careful knots. A pair of woolen stockings is patched at the heel. The goat's tether is checked, the hens given a little extra grain to see them through the cold night ahead. Outside, the snow glints in the low winter sun, the air crisp and bright against your skin. As the day drifts toward evening, you begin the small ritual of supper. The leftover pottage is thinned with a little water, and reheated this time with a handful of dried peas added for substance. The goat's milk, collected earlier in the day, is stirred in just before serving, turning the broth pale and creamy. Bread is warmed by the fire, its crust cracking faintly as you break it. The meal is eaten slowly, the peas still firm enough to give each bite a pleasant weight. The creamy broth clings to the bread, and for a moment the cold outside feels far away. The children sip their bowls carefully, steam curling around their faces. In the firelight, the room feels small but secure, the snow outside a soft wall against the world. After the bowls are cleared, you take a moment to step outside. The moonlight glances off the snow, making the village glow faintly in the dark. Smoke rises from every chimney, blurring into the night sky. Somewhere a dog barks its voice, carrying far in the still air. Your breath hangs before you in the silence, the only movement in a scene otherwise frozen in place. You return inside, closing the door firmly against the cold. The fire is banked, the bread wrapped, the pot scrubbed and set aside. You sit for a while by the hearth, feeling the day's warmth settle into your bones, your mind already turning toward tomorrow's tasks. The snow will linger for days yet, but the pottage will hold you as it always does. When you lie down at last, the blanket heavy over you, the smell of marjoram still lingers faintly in the air. Sleep comes with the quiet certainty of the cycle-bred pottage work, and rest that carries you through each winter day. The snow is still with you in the morning, though it has settled now into a crusted layer, hardened by the night's cold. When you push open the cottage door, it crackles faintly under your boots. The air is sharp, your breath quick to cloud in front of your face. The village lane is quiet, except for the scrape of a broom as someone clears a path to their doorway. Inside, the embers from last night still glow faintly under their covering of ash. You stir them to life, feeding them with slender sticks until the first flames lick upward. The warmth is slow to come, but the promise is there. Bread is your first thought now, nearly the last of the loaf baked days ago. You cut it into thin slices, laying them on a flat stone by the hearth to soften in the rising heat. A small pot of water is set over the fire, into which you drop a handful of oats. This will be the morning's fare, simple oat porridge thickened slowly and flavored with a splash of goat's milk. The smell is mild, but comforting, the steam curling in the cold air. You eat it with the warmed bread, chewing slowly, letting the heat settle in your chest before you step outside. The day's work is clear. It is time to check the storage pits and lofts. In winter, food isn't only about what you can gather fresh, it's about guarding what you have put away. You start in the garden pit, where the cabbages and turnips have been kept under straw. Lifting back the cover, you inspect each head, brushing away soil and trimming away any rot. Most are sound, though a few outer leaves have turned limp and brown. You take 1 cabbage and 2 turnips for today's cooking, recovering the pit carefully against the frost. In the loft above the cottage, the stores of grain sit in sacks, the air dry and still. You run your hand through the barley. The kernels are firm, a good sign. A small portion is measured out for grinding later in the week. The dried beans, tied in their bundles, rattle softly as you check them. You take a handful, pale and hard to soak, for the next meal. On your way back down, you glance toward the rafters where the salted herrings hang stiff with preservation. They will last for months yet, but you make note to use one soon before the taste turns too sharp. Food is always a balance between keeping enough for later and making sure nothing goes to waste. By mid-morning, the cabbage and turnips are chopped, and in the pot with the beans, now softened from their soak. A pinch of dried sage goes in as well, its scent familiar, a reminder of summer gardens. The mixture simmers slowly, the turnips sweetening the broth, the cabbage melting into the liquid, until the whole pot smells of the field and hearth together. While it cooks, you join a neighbor in the yard to split firewood. The rhythm of the axe is steady, the sound echoing faintly off the snow. Between swings, you talk of the market day to come, of the need for salt, the hope for fresh fish, the possibility of trading some spun wool for a little honey. These conversations weave the fabric of village life as much as any shared meal. Dinner is ready when the snow begins to glisten under the midday sun. The bowls are filled with the bean and cabbage stew, thick and steaming. Bread, now only the crusts of the old loaf, is dipped into the broth until it softens. You eat slowly, savoring the sweetness of the turnip, the way the beans have turned creamy in their long cooking. It is humble, yes, but hearty, and it warms you against the cold waiting outside. The afternoon is spent repairing a broken hurdle fence near the goat pen. The woven hazel rods have loosened in the frost, and you press them back into place, weaving in fresh lengths to strengthen the wall. The goat watches with calm curiosity, her breath, a soft mist in the winter air. Later, you carry a bucket to the stream, the water flowing dark and steady under its frozen edges. The cold bites your hands as you fill at the surface, trembling with each step back to the cottage. This water will serve for cooking, for soaking the grains, for tomorrow's ale making. In winter, every trip to fetch it feels longer, but every drop is needed. By evening, the fire burns higher, fed with the wood split earlier in the day. Supper is lighter, the same cabbage and bean stew, reheated with a little goat's milk stirred in for softness. You eat it with thin slices of bread baked fresh in a neighbor's oven, traded for a small bundle of dried nettles. The bread is still warm, its crust cracking under your fingers. The talk at the hearth is gentle, small jokes, small worries, and the shared understanding that the stores will last if you keep to your measures. Outside, the snow reflects the moonlight, turning the night almost bright. You step out for a moment before bed, the air sharp in your lungs, the silence deep enough to hear your own breath. When you return inside, the smell of cabbage and sage still lingers, faintly wrapped in the constant scent of wood smoke. You bank the fire carefully, lay the blanket over your shoulders, and settle into bed. The snow may stay for days yet, but the food will hold. You close your eyes with that quiet assurance that the bread, the beans, the turnips will see you through another stretch of winter. The snow has begun to melt in patches, leaving the lane mottled with white and dark earth. You wake to the sound of dripping from the eaves, each drop falling steadily into the thawing ground below. The air is still cold, but the promise of change is there, faint like the first green hint beneath frost-bitten soil. You stir the embers of the fire and feed them with kindling until the warmth seeps back into the room. The bread from yesterday's trade is still soft, a rare luxury in winter. You slice a thick piece, toast it lightly near the coals, and eat it with a smear of soft cheese from the goat's milk. The cheese is fresh, tangy, its creaminess a welcome change from the lean fare of the past weeks. A cup of warm ale washes it down the mild bitterness, settling warmly in your chest. Today is a day for checking the last of the stored roots. In the garden pit, you lift away the covering of straw and soil to find the turnips and cabbages nearly gone. You choose the best of what's left, a small cabbage, 2 firm turnips, and tuck them into your basket. These will make today's stew and perhaps the last of the winter's pottage before spring greens return. You stop at the loft on your way back in. The barley sack is low, but not empty. You take a measure and carry it to the quern stone for grinding. The steady rasp of stone against stone fills the loft, the sound rhythmic, meditative. The coarse meal gathers in the trough below, flecked with bran. It will be the heart of the day's bread, dense, dark, and nourishing. By late morning, the cabbage and turnips are chopped and simmering in the pot with the barley. A pinch of dried herbs, thyme, and a little parsley from last summer's garden joins them, the green flecks bright against the pale broth. You stir slowly, the steam curling around your hands. The smell is clean, earthy, and full of promise. While the stew bubbles, you walk to the stream. The ice has broken along the edges, the water running faster now with the melt. You kneel to rinse a cloth in the cold water, wringing it out with numb fingers. On the way back, you notice the first brave shoots of wild garlic pushing through the damp soil. You pick a small handful, their scent sharp and fresh, and slip them into your basket for supper. Dinner is served while the light is still strong. The bowls are filled with the barley root stew, the bread cut thick and warm from the hearthstone. The wild garlic is chopped fine and sprinkled over each bowl just before serving its brightness, lifting the whole meal. You eat slowly, letting each bite carry both the grounding comfort of winter food and the faint whisper of spring. In the afternoon, you help a neighbor mend a section of hedgerow. The earth is softening underfoot, and soon it will be time to prepare the fields again. You weave the hazel rods tightly, the work both practical and symbolic, a barrier against wandering animals, a mark of readiness for the growing season to come. Later, you return to the cottage to prepare the evening meal. Supper will be lighter oat porridge cooked with goat's milk, sweetened with the very last spoon of honey kept from autumn. The honey glows gold as it slips into the pot, its scent rich and warm. The oats swell and soften, absorbing the sweetness. When it is ladled into bowls, the porridge steams in the cool evening air, the smell filling the small space. The children eat quietly, their spoons scraping gently against the wooden bowls. Outside, the last of the snow catches the fading light, the white turning to silver under the first stars. You sit with your bowl, the honeyed porridge warming you all the way through, the taste lingering long after the last bite. When the meal is done, you set the bowls aside and bank the fire for the night. The cottage is still, the air thick with the smells of bread, honey, and wood smoke. You step outside once before bed. The lane glistens faintly with melting snow, the hedgerows dark against the pale light of the moon. Somewhere water drips steadily from the branches, a soft rhythm against the quiet night. You go back in, wrap the blanket around your shoulders, and lie down on the straw-filled mattress. The fire's glow fades, the scents of the day folding themselves into the dark. Tomorrow will bring the work of turning toward spring, but for now, winter still holds you steady, sheltering, sustained by the bread and pottage that have carried you through. The fire has burned down to a soft red glow, its warmth gentle now, no longer pushing, but simply resting in the room like a quiet friend. Outside, the last of the snowmelt trickles in tiny rivulets down the lane, the sound faint against the deep stillness of night. You're wrapped in the kind of darkness that feels protective, as if the whole world has slowed just for you. The day's images drift lazily in your mind, the steam rising from a bowl of barley stew, the smell of honey melting into warm oats, the sight of wild garlic peeking bravely from damp earth. These are not grand memories, but small ones, the kind that last longer, because they're rooted in the gentle rhythm of survival. You let yourself picture the village under moonlight. Each cottage holding its own pool of warmth, each chimney breathing soft trails of smoke into the star-pinned sky. The hedges stand quiet, the fields rest, and the animals settle into their straw. Every living thing seems to understand that this is a time for stillness, for letting the body rest, so the spirit can gather its strength. Your breathing slows to match the calm around you. The weight of the blanket over you feels like a shield, holding the day's cold firmly on the other side. You imagine the taste of fresh bread you'll have again soon, the faint sweetness of milk from the morning's milking, the scent of herbs you've yet to gather. The quiet deepens. The fire murmurs low, the air cool and steady, and you, wrapped in the simple comfort of food, warmth, and rest, drift gently toward sleep, the same way the village drifts into night, knowing that tomorrow will arrive slowly like bread rising in the early light.